children's students at the university. So if they can deal with it, I know we can. But that's what our heart group leaders are going through, as we try to familiarize ourselves with all of this stuff. We were just talking here, and we see all of these images, and we try to understand what they are. I think sometimes the forest, we lose sight of the forest for the trees. We focus in on the little details, and we miss what John is really trying to communicate. And that communication is that the Christ that they serve is the King who is powerful and who holds them secure, and they have nothing to fear. That's the ultimate message. And so I hope that came through in the study this morning. Last week, as part of our... Yeah, go ahead. Michael Gorman, Gorman. And you can buy it used on Amazon for less than $10. I think brand new, it's not more than about 12 or 13. It's a really good little book. He spends the first half of it, now listen to me, he spends the first half of the book setting the stage, okay, understanding their geopolitical context, okay? Revelation is an unapologetically political book. In fact, Matt, our first banner that we had a donkey and an elephant fighting to the death, and the lamb up in heaven looking down. And one of our elders looked at that and he said, it looks like the elephant's winning. And he said, maybe we ought to change the banner. He said, we don't want to make it look like one side is winning over the other. But I mean, that's an elephant and a donkey. The elephant's bigger. There's nothing you can do about it. Okay, it's okay. Thank you. So he sets the stage, and then in the second half of the book, it's not a verse-by-verse commentary, but he takes sections of the book. 1 through 3 is a section. 4 and 5 is a section. 6 through 20 is a section. And then 21 and 22 is a section. It's been amazing to me that most of the Revelation commentaries I've consulted are about that big. Because once you get into the middle of the book, it's 3 cycles, it's 3 repetitions. It's not linear in its progression, which is a thing that a lot of people who study Revelation mess up with. They think it's all moving forward to an end. Well, it's moving forward to an end, but not in linear progression, so that we can say, well, in 1952, this happened. Well, there that is in the book of Revelation. 2017, this happened. Oh, I read about that in the book of Revelation. No, you didn't. Okay? You might have read symbols of it. You might have read themes of it. But ladies and gentlemen, history is cyclical. Neros come and Neros go. But does the church worry? Goodness, no. I'm sorry, I've been reading too many children's books. Okay. So anyway, as preparation for really understanding what Revelation is about, we undertook a little study of holiness last week, and I want to finish that up this week. And next week, we're going to begin our little series on how to read the Bible. Revelation brings up some interesting questions about how we're supposed to read the Bible, how we are supposed to study it. And so we're going to engage that question in the next few weeks. But one of the major themes of Revelation is come out. Come out from them. Uproot yourself from them. Untangle yourself from them. And be the separate holy people that I've called you to be. And so last week we just asked the question, what is holiness? What does it mean to be holy? And we said the word has an actual definition, doesn't it? It means to be separate or set apart. And we looked last week at the ultimate in holiness, the epitome of holiness, the one whose very image causes Isaiah to give him a new nickname, the Holy One of Israel, right? God, the ultimate in being separate and set apart. And we said not only is God holy, but those things related to God are holy. So in the Old Testament, the priests are holy, the tabernacle's holy, the Israelites are holy, Jerusalem is holy. Why? Because they're all related to God. His people, His servants, His city, right? And we said that carries over to us today too. That same word in the Old Testament that means holy, in the New Testament can also mean saint. And so you and I, if we belong to God through the Lord Jesus Christ, we are separate and set apart. We are holy. We are saints. Well, last week we also looked at how people respond to God's holiness. And one of our illustrations was this John response in Revelation 1 when he sees Jesus really. You know, it's interesting to me, John could have given us a good physical description of Jesus, couldn't he? If he's the beloved disciple who leans on Jesus' breast at the Last Supper, he could have told us. I don't know if you heard what John Dominic Crossan said in the video. He said the typical Jewish man in this day and age was 5'1". We have any, who's 5'1" in here? Dotsie is 5'1" with short dark hair. 110 pounds. Is that what you've always pictured? I mean, John could have given us that description. But he realized that what he was seeing was not really what he was seeing. On the Mount of Transfiguration, he caught a glimpse of who Jesus really was, and then in this vision in Revelation, he sees him fully. And it's terrifying. This glimpse of God's holiness causes John to pass out like dead. It causes Isaiah to say, woe is me. It causes Job to say, shut my mouth, I hate myself. It causes Habakkuk to say, decay crept into my bones. An experience of God's holiness is never a positive thing. Well, it can be if you respond well. If you see what you're supposed to see. And Isaiah did, and John did. Peter, after the miraculous catch of fish, they did. Not everybody has responded positively, and that's where I want to pick up this morning. I think we may have alluded to these things last week, but I want to show them to you in a little bit more detail. Go to Leviticus chapter 10. Oh, here's a story famous in the churches of Christ. Well, I say that because we're really big on patterns for things. We're really big on God laying out specific details, and we follow them to the specific detail. And you know, that's not a bad thing at all. Because in Leviticus 10, two of God's priests who had received God's revelation did not respond appropriately to it. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it and laid incense on it and offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Now it appears, you say, man, what a bloodthirsty, horrible God. They just made a mistake. I think the story is meant to communicate that they were not just making a mistake. They were very purposefully doing something opposed to what God had revealed. They were sort of putting it in his face, if you will, that they were doing it a different way. And they suffered the consequences. And Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord has said, among those who are near me, I will be sanctified. And before all the people, I will be glorified. That word sanctified means made to be holy or shown to be holy. And, you know, there's a principle here I think we would do good to pay attention to. Those people who know God best, those people who have a vision of Him and understand what He expects, are the ones above all other people on the planet that ought to exalt God and bear the responsibility of teaching what He expects. And that's what Moses explains. Look down in verse 10. You are to distinguish between the holy and the common, between the clean and unclean, and you are to teach the people of Israel all the statutes that the Lord has spoken by Moses. If you can't trust God's people to promote God's laws and protect God's glory, who can you trust? That's why criticisms of Christians like this are particularly damning. When we speak up for the sacredness. Is that a word? Close. It's close. The sanctity of, let's say, traditional marriage between a man and a woman. When we stand up for that, and we call homosexuality an abomination or a sin, but we keep having affairs, and our sex lives are completely screwed up, we lose all credibility. Do you understand that? And that makes the people out there in the world to whom we would try to listen, to whom we would try to teach God's holy standard, it makes them go like, well, you people don't even do this. And that makes us particularly susceptible to God's judgment. You say, Swindle, you're making this up. I'm not. Would you look at a text in 1 Peter chapter 4?
Before you go there,
yeah.
Statement on Leviticus 10.
Yeah.
When he said, teach them what is holy, to treat me as holy. Nadab and Abihu didn't have the authority to go into the tabernacle to offer the fire. Only Aaron could do that. He was the high priest.
So they were doing something they weren't even supposed to be doing in the first place. Not just doing it wrong.
With the fire. No,
yeah.
He was going into the presence of God uncommanded.
Yeah, presuming something for oneself. Well, this passage in 1 Peter 4, verse 17, it's time for judgment to begin with the household of God. Let that sink in for just a minute. It's time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if the righteous is scarcely saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? Now, I don't think he's saying, if you're going to be saved, it's only going to be by the skin of your teeth. We're good in the churches of Christ of standing up against once saved, always saved. But we're not so good at feeling once saved, always, confident. We're not real good at that. And we feel like if we're going to be saved, it's going to be scarcely saved. I don't think that's what Peter's teaching here. I think Peter is teaching, those of us who know better are expected to live better. Those of us who've received God's revelation and have been called into relationship with Him, we have an obligation for living it out before the world and upholding God as holy. And it gets Nadab and Abihu in trouble, and it gets Moses in trouble. Look at Numbers 20. Numbers 20, this is the story where Moses is prohibited entrance into the promised land. People are griping and complaining about water one more time. Verse 10 of Numbers 20, Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. God had told Moses to speak to the rock, and it would yield water. But Moses said, "Here now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice. And water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, they and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them." If you can't trust Moses to uphold the holiness of the God whom he has seen, at least his back, who can you trust? All right, so this upholding God's holy and righteous character, this living such good lives among the pagans so that they see God's holy and righteous character through us is a big deal. And when we let it down, when we let it go, when we live like we have never had an experience of God's holiness, we're going to suffer the consequences. And so there are some improper responses to God's holiness, and those responses all have to do with seeing it, but doing nothing about it. I've been teaching through this Pentateuch material to my Old Testament survey class, and the other day we were in Numbers. Turn back over to chapter 13, where God sends the spies in. And 10 of the spies come back with a bad response, and God decides He's going to wipe them out. And He says this, it's actually in chapter 14, verse 11. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will this people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me in spite of all the signs I have done among them?" You talk about people who'd seen the holiness and the glory of God. This is the generation that watched the 10 plagues fall on Egypt. This is the generation that crossed the Dead Sea, the Red Sea on dry land. This is the generation that walked to Mount Sinai and was provided with food and water and clothing, and their feet didn't swell. They didn't get blisters or sunburns. And yet, when faced with their first real trial, they're ready to pack it in. They saw, but they didn't see. Well, we said in our sermon this morning, when you see God's holiness, it changes everything. You can't be complacent anymore. So there are improper responses. There are also some proper responses. Turn to the end of the book of Numbers, to chapter 23. Actually, it's chapter 25. That's how I feel this morning, about 2 chapters off. Chapter 25, the people of Israel are worshiping idols again. And their worship of idols is combined in this text with immorality. Idolatry and immorality go hand in hand.
There is no description in the Bible.
It's Peter Jennings, back from the dead. Idolatry and immorality go hand in hand. You become like what you worship. And so in this case, the people of Israel are becoming engaged in fertility practices as they worship the Baal of Peor. And worship of the Baal of Peor has to do with worship with sacred prostitutes. And the men have been engaging in that, and God is punishing them. He sends a plague among them. 24,000 die in the plague. Look at verse 6. "Behold, one of the people of Israel came and brought a Midianite woman to his family in the sight of Moses and in the sight of the whole congregation of the people of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting." It'd be like something, just terrible happening here at Highway, and all the elders are up front and they're discussing, what are we going to do about this? And, Danny and Mike are down on their knees praying, and Bob's rubbing his head, and Dana's writing down the names of the dead. And while all this is happening, not Earl, better use somebody that's not here. Well, now I can't think of a name at all. I'll just use myself. Devin takes one of these prostitutes, walks right in front of the podium and into the room there where all the food of fertility is kept. Well, verse 7, when Phinehas the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose and left the congregation and took a spear in his hand and went after the man of Israel into the chamber and pierced both of them, the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. In other words, they were engaged in the embrace of love, and he just kind of shish kebabbed them. And the plague on the people of Israel was stopped. And the Lord said to Moses, "Phinehas the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the people of Israel, in that he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not consume the people of Israel in my jealousy. Therefore say, behold, I give to him my covenant of peace, and it shall be to him and to his descendants after him a covenant of perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the people of Israel." Finally, somebody gets God's holiness and stands up for it. And you say, wow, that was really radical. Yes, it was. God's holiness is so radical, and our departure from it is so radical, that only a radical response will suffice. I think I may even have taken you to Matthew chapter 5 last week, where Jesus, warning about the sin of adultery, says, if you've lusted, you've already committed adultery in your heart. So if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. You say, well, he doesn't mean that. He's just speaking in hyperbolic language. Maybe. Maybe he is. But maybe he knows the truth of God's holiness, that it's such an awesome thing that not just any old response will suffice. I've told you before about the student I had that came to me struggling with pornography on his computer. And he said, how am I going to get over this? And I said, well, have you tried this? Yeah, it didn't work. Well, have you tried this? Yeah, but it didn't work. And I said, well, looks to me like the only option you've got is to get rid of your computer. And he said, I can't do that. I said, well, you either want to kick this habit or you don't. Right? Radical response. Radical response. Well, where this all comes down to me and you is the same God of Leviticus who called his people to be holy has called me and you to the same task. I want you to look at 1 Peter chapter 1, where Peter quotes this text in Leviticus directly. And it's in response to a church that's suffering. The same kind of persecution that's going on in the book of Revelation is going on in 1 Peter. And Peter, too, is trying to comfort this church by telling them how to live in the face of this persecution. And here's what he says, verse 13. Therefore, preparing your minds for action. You know it's coming. It shouldn't surprise you, this suffering. Therefore, preparing your minds for action, be sober-minded. Set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Your hope in this world is not on everybody liking you or accepting you or promoting what you believe. That is not your hope in this world. If your hope in this world is to finally vote for the party that gets it all right, your hope is dashed. The only hope you have or I have is the hope that one day God will make the wrongs right, He will balance the accounts of history, and we as His people will be vindicated. And so He says, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ, at His second coming. And so as obedient children, He says, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. But as He who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it's written in Leviticus, you shall be holy, for I am holy. The thing about it is, when we start to feel pressure from society, all right, let's think about the revelation here for just a minute. The line I used in the sermon this morning was this. John knew that these churches had either experienced or would soon experience a time when they would be forced to choose between God and country. All right, now what that means is you've got these 7 cities that really are trying to court favor with the emperor. They really want the emperor to build a temple in their city, because think about all the revenue that brings in. Think about all the revenue